The Greater Connector series was started by the ambassadors of the Walkway, which we are very, I have to say, love every single one of them. And they came up with this great program to teach and show about what wonderful history is here in the Hudson Valley and what is around in this area. And the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association is one of those spectacular places we have right here in our backyard. Happens once a month. This month you're lucky because we have it twice a month. On April 30th, we're on site at Upper Landing, showing you and teaching you about glass eels. So you'll be able to see them and see what DEC and the speaker is going to do with them. We're going to announce a date this week about our Fire on the Bridge, which is honoring our fire anniversary of we'll have firemen and actual fire truck from the 1970s there. And then the big event is Mayfest, May 21st and 22nd. Tickets are going fast, so you can go to our events calendar and there's a home page button that says buy your tickets now. We have 25 wineries, distilleries, and ales and ciders to sample from, and over 225 booths for shopping. There's children's activities and all kinds of things to do. So with that, I think we have 2 more minutes to wait. So I'm going to tell you about another exciting program that we are bringing forth. It's called the Walkway Explorer program. And Shirley doesn't know this, but I will announce that the books are ready and I'm picking them up from the printer tomorrow morning. The great thing about that is that it's for 2 different age groups, and you can see stuff about it on the website. And it's an activity book with scavenger hunt and history questions and all different kinds of activities for the kids. And then what they do is once they get through all the activities, they bring their book back to us and they get a Walkway Explorer patch, which is awesome. So just visit walkway.org. And if you want the events, go to the event button. And if you would like anything about the Explorers, just go to the program button. And I'm just letting a bunch in, which I think is amazing. It's such a perfect time for this Greater Connector series because of the gardening factor. So I'm very excited about this one. So we've got 2 more minutes before I start the actual program itself. But Shirley, do you want to talk a little bit about the what's going on tonight?
Sure, yes. We are very excited to hear more about Beatrix Farrand. I'm sure many of you have been to FDR and have actually visited the garden and maybe don't know so much about it. It's always beautiful. The pictures I know, we have Karen Waltuch, who's the horticulturist, and takes care of the Beatrix Farrand Garden. And she's going to be presenting tonight. It's the oldest surviving work of the foremost female landscape architect, Beatrix Farrand. And the site is located in Hyde Park, and it's part of the Bellefield Mansion estate. That has an intriguing history of its own. So we're going to learn about the mansion, the design, the restoration of the garden, and about the story about Beatrix Farrand. So I would like to really thank Karen for doing this for us. We have had amazing presenters, and we're very lucky that we have so many people around us in the Hudson Valley that can connect us and help us learn more about gardens, mansions, local history, just some of the most amazing things that you probably wouldn't think of in general. So Karen, I really thank you for doing this, and we're excited, and I think we're going to have a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's just about 6:30, so I guess I should get going, and if we have some latecomers, they'll just join and learn what they learn. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I want to thank Nancy Foster, who you were mentioning that you guys have some really dedicated volunteers, and she's the person that reached out to invite me to do this series. So thank you very much to Nancy and to the Walkway Over the Hudson organization. So yeah, I'm going to give you basically the tour that I give when I have groups come to the mansion site. I give a lot of tours. So this is just going to be my virtual presentation that you would receive if you came to see the actual garden. So, right, so you guys already introduced me. I'm the horticulturist at the Beatrix Farrand Garden, and I've been there. This will be my 5th year, and I took over from someone who I always have to give credit to. Ann Sims was the original horticulturist of this wonderful restoration, and she deserves all of the plaudits she can get. So she did the bulk of the work that you see when you visit and really deserves a shout out. And I should also mention that you guys said that we're on the grounds of the FDR home site, and that's true. We are one of the official park partners for the National Park Service. So many locations of national parks and national historic sites have independent philanthropic groups that work to preserve or to promote or to raise funds for specific sites or specific parts of national park programming. And our garden association specifically takes care of this historic site. So we have a very small staff and a board of directors, and then we are hugely supported by a volunteer group. So if any of you were interested, and I'll just see if I can go to the next slide here, you are always welcome to email me if you feel like volunteering. We have people who volunteer in the garden doing work with the plants, and then we have people that help kind of be welcoming garden greeters in the garden, and we have a volunteer board and a group of advisors. So we're highly supported by volunteers, and also very much so obviously by the National Park Service, who we are indebted to for all sorts of reasons. And here is a map of our site. So if you have visited Springwood and the rest of the FDR property, the problem that we have is that most people who come to see Springwood don't know that there's a really important historic garden, the Beatrix Farrand Garden, on site. So here's a little map, and if you ever need to explain to anyone, when you first come in off Route 9, that number 1 in the right upper corner is Bellefield Mansion, and our garden is attached to that mansion. So this is just to show you that you know, we're on the site and we're nowhere near Springwood, and unfortunately we don't get a lot of crossover traffic. So we are trying desperately to let people know that we're there. And this lecture couldn't have come at a better time to help me get the word out, especially right before spring is coming and all of our flowers are going to be popping. So just, yeah, so make note, there's my email address, hort@bfgahydepark.org. And if you have any questions about anything I talk about today that we don't get to touch on, or if you're interested in volunteering or have any other comments, you know, you're welcome to reach out to me. So yeah, like I mentioned, I give a lot of tours. So if you're part of another tour group or garden club or school, or you have students that are interested in landscape architecture or women's history or flowers or climate change, there's lots of things that we could talk about in the garden. And I host groups all year long to talk on a lot of different subjects. So that's just something to know. And I'm going to talk also about the film that we produced, which is a way that a lot of people are learning about our garden. So a couple of years ago, our organization, when it was being run by Ann Sims as the horticulturist, had the idea to come up with a feature-length film to educate people about Beatrix Farrand, because people in horticulture knew about her, but she just was not a really commonly known artist in America as she should have been. And so this feature film we made, we were so lucky it got premiered at NYBG in the Bronx. And then during the COVID pandemic in 2020, PBS picked it up and it got played all over the country on PBS stations, and you can still watch it if you're interested in seeing it. It's on Amazon and it's on Vimeo. You can stream it in those places, but it's a wonderful film that visits many of her gardens and talks to a lot of horticultural experts, and it's super fascinating, and I'm very proud of it. So I like to also give it props whenever I can. So let's get started talking about Beatrix Farrand. This is a picture of her parents and her cousin, her aunt, who are we going to touch on. So that top left picture is her mother, who is known by Minnie. Her name is Mary Cadwallader. And on the right, her father was Frederick Jones, and he was from a family in Philadelphia. And it's said that the idiom "keeping up with the Joneses" is actually based on the Jones family of which he was a member. So that kind of puts their societal rank in perspective as we talk about the next parts of these people's lives. And then the bottom picture there, her famous aunt, Edith Wharton, we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So Beatrix was born into a fascinating family that had a lot of interesting stories of its own and formed her into a fascinating person as well. So Frederick and Minnie were married for about 26 years. And they didn't live together for all of those years, though. They had a kind of tumultuous marriage, and in a scandal, they divorced, and Frederick left and moved away, I think, to Europe. And Beatrix Jones was raised primarily by her mother with a lot of support from her aunt. So Edith was actually Frederick's sister, but Edith stuck it out with Minnie and Beatrix, and the three of them were kind of a unit for a while in Beatrix's youth. So Minnie, this is an older picture of Beatrix's mom. Minnie was a very accomplished woman herself. She was an author and an editor, and she hosted literary salons in her home, which many very important writers of the early 1900s and late 1800s would attend. And one of her great friends was Henry James. She was very well known in the respected literary circles. And another thing that I found really funny is starting to get popular from that Gilded Age television program, I think that's out right now. And there's so much about the new money and the old money, and Mrs. Astor and whether she approves of certain people. And so there was a list called the 400 of New York City, and it was the most upper class, respected families, and Minnie and Beatrix were on that 400 list. So again, giving you some perspective, these were very connected people in old New York. And here's young, beautiful Beatrix in a cabinet card. Her, like I mentioned, her aunt, Edith Wharton, was really on the scene as a member of this little family. And she was only 10 years older than Beatrix, which is also interesting to think about, these women kind of growing up together. And it seems like the three of them, I would think, with Minnie's extremely advanced intellect and with Edith already, displaying such talent, and then this young woman, Beatrix, growing up in this family, this was a kind of you couldn't stop these women. It seems like Beatrix was probably really supported with a lot of good feminist energy growing up, whether they would put it in those terms or not. But it makes sense that she would go on to kind of follow her heart with what she was inspired to do as she later became a horticulturist. So here's Edith Wharton, just another little picture I found that I thought was really sweet of young Edith. And I want to talk about Bar Harbor, Maine, because this is where the family home was that they would go to for the summers. Many New York families had multiple places that they could go for cold winters or hot summers. And so Bar Harbor, Maine was the location of the Joneses family. And there's a lot of really lovely anecdotes about Beatrix spending summers with her family there and going off into the wilderness around the home and discovering and studying all the flora and fauna around, and stories of her discovering plants and things that she would like and digging them up out of the woods and bringing them back to the house and making little flower beds of her own from the native plants that she found around. And apparently many other members of her family were actually very interested in gardening. So this little hobby of a young woman was totally supported. And we think is what the seed that started all of her love of native plants and gardening was probably in these summers in Bar Harbor, Maine. And she got older and the hobby became more of an actual interest, and they decided that they wanted to pursue schooling. And at the time, in the late 1800s, this was not a possibility for women, and there was no place for her to go formally study. She did take a little bit of drafting tutoring from teachers at the School of Mines at Columbia University, but her real botany education started with this guy, Charles Sprague Sargent. So he was the founding director of the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard University, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. If you guys haven't been, I highly recommend going to see this arboretum and outside of Boston. So the actual Arboretum actually was started the year of Beatrix's birth, which I don't think I even mentioned, was 1872. That was the year Beatrix was born, and that was the year this Arboretum was born. And this is worth noting because this year is the 150th anniversary of both Beatrix Farrand and that Arboretum. So we're celebrating Beatrix's birthday and also giving applause to the Arboretum, which has sustained for that long. So Charles Frank Sargent was their original founding director, a very, very well-known, esteemed botanist. And he actually took Beatrix Jones in for a couple of years to study intensively botany and nursery propagation. And she learned, she had got a really, really inclusive education on very serious botany and horticulture from kind of the it person that she could possibly have learned this from. And he named a plant actually for her that she discovered, a native New England hawthorn. And he named it, I hope I don't, Latin is a dead language that's hard for me. So Crataegus jonesii, Crataegus jonesii. So jonesii being her last name Jones, this native New England hawthorn was named for her. So in addition to these 2 years that she spent with the Sargent family studying, she did go to Europe to do some hands-on studying with her aunt Edith and her mother. The three of them went to, I think, over 100 gardens all over Europe. And this is just a picture of her in the era, I think is so glamorous and beautiful. They traveled all over looking at gardens, up and down Europe and North Africa, and they saw things that were overgrown that she criticized. They saw things that were developing. They saw very formal gardens. They saw all sorts of things that she kept super, super complicated and wonderful notes and photographs and drawings. And in her notes, we see that she criticized, and she also complimented, and she admired, and she asked questions. And it was really a time when she was honing what she would make her aesthetic and her design identity from all of these hundreds of gardens that she saw. She was forming what would be her interest later in her career. So let's see. One of the most important people that she was interested in studying was Gertrude Jekyll. And Gertrude Jekyll was a British horticulturist who was very well known for a very innovative approach to design in the garden, which took on more of an impressionist painting motif, which is actually something that she did a lot too. She was also a very well-known painter, but her plantings were these big swaths of color, more textural and developed, with different shades of color, complementing and contrasting with each other. And this was a really new concept of the era. So Gertrude Jekyll was highly influential. And then the other person she was really interested in was an Irish horticulturist named William Robinson. And William Robinson was very well known for philosophies about wild gardening. And there's a book, actually, The Wild Garden by William Robinson, that you can still get, that talks a lot about utilizing native plants and thinking about a place that you are designing for and how it can promote a feeling of more natural aesthetic versus something that looks very formalized. Wild gardens and Gertrude Jekyll's color swath gardens kind of became what we now think of as a cottage garden idea. So when you think about plants that are more connected to each other rather than like very specific specimens or examples that you see in a landscape, things that are working together kind of in tandem. And at the time, the gardens that were very popular in Europe and in the United States were of Victorian and continental influence, a lot of annuals and tropical plants that were raised in greenhouses would be put out kind of as like focal point displays to show these extravagant, interesting things, but in very kind of sterile environments. And the lawns would have beds cut out of them with very pristine lines. There's still a lot of gardens that are like this today, and there's still a lot of beauty to be found in them. But these guys were working kind of against that idea, and it really inspired Beatrix Farrand. So back in New York City, where she and Minnie lived on East 11th Street, she decided to open up a landscape design company, and she put it on the top floor of her mother's house, and she set up with a couple of assistants, and she got to work. And she, as we mentioned, comes from this very societal connected family with Edith Wharton, who was getting very famous by then, and her mom, who had a lot of connections, and the Jones family having a lot of connections. And she started to get commissions and did a lot of work. She got a lot of residential commissions and some institution commissions. And so she started her company, I wrote this down, in 1985. And only 4 years later, I'm sorry, 1895, I got my numbers backwards. 1895, she started her company. And by 1899, only 4 years later, she was already so established and so respected, and people really saw that she made quality design work, that she was invited to be one of the first 11 founding members of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And of course, as we can all guess, she was the only woman to be invited in that 11-person group. So pretty amazing that she was already so esteemed in just a short 3 or 4 years. And in those few short years, and leading up into when she designed our garden, which is at the Bellefield Mansion in Hyde Park, New York, she did 25, I just wrote down some statistics because I thought it was so interesting. So just in those first 15 years, she did 25 residential and institution sites, including some work at her aunt's, the Mount, which is still, in Lenox, Massachusetts, this beautiful, beautiful estate. And Beatrix designed a few things that got put in, and then she also designed a few things that I think never actually got made. And the Mount, I believe, is doing some research right now to figure out if they want to restore or realize any of those designs. So she did some work at this grand estate. She did some work at the Protestant Washington Cathedral, which we now know as the Washington National Cathedral. And then she also started working at college institutions. So this is a really charming picture of her looking so stern in the nursery at Princeton. She did a lot of work as their first consulting landscape gardener. And she also got some work at some other institutions. And I wanted to mention, well, she was at Yale, she was at Oberlin, the University of Chicago, and then also she did a little bit of work at Vassar, which is in our area, as some of you know, in Poughkeepsie, Vassar College. And a really great article was just published about a year and a half ago by one of the professors and a grad student at Vassar on the work that Farrand did on the Vassar College campus. So I recommend a Google to look for that. Professor Elet, E-L-E-T is her last name, and she wrote a great article about the few years that Farrand was at Vassar. So very interesting, she was around. She also did some elements of design at the White House Rose Garden, and this was when Woodrow Wilson was president. And I find this so interesting because if you know the years of your history and the suffragette movement, Beatrix could not vote at the time that she did design work at the White House. So I find that just kind of a fascinating thing to ruminate on for a little bit. She was, important enough and esteemed enough to be hired by the president to do some landscape design at the White House, but she couldn't vote for people. So pretty interesting. So 1912 is the year I threw out a couple minutes ago. That was the year that she designed the garden that we have at Bellefield and Hyde Park. And it was the next year in 1913 that she met and that she married her husband, Max Farrand. So by this time she's already 40 years old, and she was on a really different path than a lot of women of her era, starting her own business, having her own office, her own staff, having a career that went on until she was 40, until she got married. And she's older than 40 in this photograph. I just love this picture of her and Max. And they continued to have their own careers. Even when she was married, she did not stop having her office. So it was no longer Beatrix Jones, landscape gardener, it was now Beatrix Farrand. But she continued to take commissions and to do design work after they got married. But a few years after they got married, Max got a job as the first, what was his position? He was the first director of the Huntington Library. And so they moved to Santa Marina, California. And she tried to get a little established in California, but she was really pushed back by the established landscape architects that were there at the time, and they didn't really give her many opportunities. She couldn't really find a place for herself in California. But by this time, she already had 3 offices. She had an office in California, in New York City, and in Maine, where they summered, she and Max. So she just continued doing her work with a very, very, very long train commute. And we see in her archives, in the records of all of the garden work that she didn't really slow down. She continued taking on commissions and continued working all over the East Coast and some in the Midwest. So there's just a couple of places still in California where she did some work that they've recognized, but mostly she continued her career where it was on the East Coast, even though they were living in California. And while she was in California, she created one of her biggest masterpieces that's still around today. This is a photograph of Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C. This project took her a little over 10 years. She was working with the Robert and Mildred Bliss family, and it was a really, really challenging landscape because of the grade of the estate. It was a very steep, hilly estate, and she did this just kind of magic to make these different garden rooms appear along this cliffside. And so this is a garden I highly recommend if you're interested in Beatrix Farrand. Go to DC and check this garden out. Here's another picture of a Wisteria Arbor that she created at Dumbarton Oaks. So there's stories of her getting on the train in California with notes and ideas of things that she wanted her crew to know about at the Dumbarton Oaks estate. And an assistant would meet her halfway in Chicago, and they would pass off the things that the assistant brought for her, and she would pass off her notes, and then she'd go back to California, and the other would go the other way, and like vice versa, just back and forth, and many, many letters between her and Mildred Bliss about the development and the choices and the designs of this, because they really worked on this garden together. And one of the wonderful things that she left us, besides the beautiful garden, is this treatise on how to take care of the garden. Because after 10 years of working on it and all of her care and all of her attentiveness, she knew that there would have to be gardeners to take the baton after her, and people that were going to need to know what her aesthetic choices and decisions would be on the grounds. And she wrote this book that talks about everything, that talks about the sculptures and the gates and the plants and the grading and the tiles and everything you could possibly imagine. And if this tree gets too big, what do you do for it? And if this thing that you planted doesn't work in this location, what's a replacement plant you could put in there? It's highly detailed. It's a wonderful book, and it's out of print, but you can get it. And you also can see it in a PDF form on the Dumbarton Oaks website. But it really offers all of us who are stewards of a Beatrix Farrand location wonderful tools on things that we think she would implement in our own location. So even though this is a DC book, a book that's for plants that would be from the zone in Washington, DC, there's still a lot of stuff that we can use and be informed by for our work in, more northern New England location gardens. So this is a great, great book. And after, they were in California for a while and did all this work, and Max had his career. Eventually they did retire. And I mentioned that they spent summers in Maine at the family location, which was at Reef Point. And after they retired, they decided that they wanted to undertake this really ambitious goal, which was to create a horticultural school and library and estate at their home in Reef Point, Maine. And so that's what they set out to do in their retirement. I guess they just were not ready to rest. And they were in Reef Point for a few years, and then unfortunately Max passed away, but they started laying the groundwork to have this horticultural college and archive resource library. And as part of that, Beatrix started writing these wonderful bulletin journals, this periodical, and she had her staff, different really talented gardeners and designers, write articles as well. And the compilation of all of them were put into a book called the Reef Point Garden Bulletins. And unfortunately, this book is also out of print, but this one is a little easier to come by. And every time I check on different used websites, I'm able to grab a copy or two. We actually had a book club a couple winters ago at our garden, just for us to keep plants on the mind during the snowy winter here in Poughkeepsie and Hyde Park. And we read through this and I was able to find many copies. So if you're interested in gardening and you're interested in learning more about the viewpoint of Beatrix Farrand and her staff, this is a great collection of essays and articles. And mentioning all of those archives that she had at Reef Point, I want to also let you know that there is a huge repository of things that she sent to the University of California in Berkeley. So backtracking a little bit, I got ahead of myself. Reef Point, the school that I mentioned that she wanted to open, unfortunately was just so ahead of its time. And I've talked with other horticulturists and plant lovers, and gosh, if this was around right now, like, sign me up. I would move to Reef Point and study under Beatrix Farrand all of the native plants and all of the wonderful things that she knew from her long career. But at the time, a school run by a woman in a place that's super hard to get to, that's very far away in northern Maine, like in northern United States and Maine, it didn't gain traction. And the tax laws apparently were very, very high there. It was very hard to keep this estate going. And they kind of ran out of money and they just didn't have support. So the school didn't happen, and Max at this point had passed away, and she's trying to make this all work herself, and it just had to get dissolved. So her huge collection of archives, all of her herbarium that she kept, her pressed flowers and all of her scientific botanical data and all of her letters and all of her designs and all of the things that she collected over all these decades, she shopped around to different places where she thought that she could donate it. And she found at UC Berkeley that they had the most weather protected and insect protected archives. So she put all of these things in crates and had 2 men drive it across the country to California. It was too important to get put on a train. So it was hand delivered across the country to this archive. And a lot of it is now digitized, and you can see some beautiful drawings and some information, and even some of her pressed flower herbarium has been digitized. So you can look at that on this website. So I wanted to mention, it's a really fun place to go poke around. And then, so her plants, her archives have left, and then there's the plant collection at Reef Point. She had a huge collection of plants that she had developed as part of the school and part of the study idea. And it was dissolved, and a large portion of it was disassembled. And now some remaining pieces of those gardens can still be seen. There's the Thuya Garden and the Astaku Azalea Garden, and both of those are in Northeast Harbor, Maine. So some of her plants are still living on, just in different locations. And if you watch our film, you'll see just some kind of devastating photographs of, these huge established beautiful, beautiful things just kind of being taken out of her garden and sent off to other places. But it's kind of a hard thing to watch, the love that she put into this place, and it just had to be dissolved and disassembled. And then she herself decided to move in with her longtime gardener, had a farm at Garland Farm in Maine. And so the last remaining years of her life, she and her companion Clementine, who I think was like her nurse companion, the 2 of them went to go live at Garland Farm. And she very peacefully lived there for a few more years until she died. And she died in 1959. So this is a picture of her and her dog Cubby, her little, I don't know if it's like a Brussels Griffon, some little squishy faced dog, Cubby. And her last garden that she ever designed, she made 2 side by side. One that looked out the window of her nursemaid Clementine's window, and Clementine apparently liked really hot colors, so all the plants and the flowers put in there were all bright yellows and reds and oranges, and then Beatrix preferred cool colors. So out of her window, she put a beautiful garden that was all blues and lavenders and whites and cream colors. And those gardens are still being taken care of today at Garland Farm in Maine, and you can visit them. They have some select hours and days during the year because their season is so much shorter than ours. But that's her last garden that she ever created, and it's still there, and they're just lovely. So yeah, so in her career, she designed over 200 residential and institutional gardens, and of those 200, not that many survived, unfortunately. So that brings us to Bellfield. And I think I've gone a little long, so I'm going to go through this a little quickly. But the Bellfield House, this is an early form of it, passed through many, 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 many hands, many families, lots of different stories came through all the different decades. But the original house was built in 1796 for Judge John Johnston and his wife, Susanna Bard. And Bard she was the niece of John Bard, for whom Bard College is named. So Johnston's went down to another family, and then a few years later, this is just another early picture I have a few early pictures of the Bellfield House. You can see there's no garden attached to this photograph, and the architecture of it looks a little bit different. So many different families passed through to many different people. One of the families who lived in this house at one point, the Holbrooks, are the people who built the house to the greater southwest, which is what we now know was the bones of Springwood. So it was an owner of the Bellefield House that built that secondary house on the estate that would become the Roosevelt House, the Springwood House. There's just another, I don't know who that gentleman is on the porch, but this is just such a lovely picture. So again, no Beatrix Farrand Garden yet, no architectural renovation that we know of in the present, but a lot of the same features are still, you can see here. So to the left, where you can kind of see the mountain over the river to the left there, you'll see in a second that is where the Beatrix Farrand Garden was put in. So the person that we care the most about for our purposes is Thomas Newbold. This is Senator Thomas Newbold, and he was a New York State Democratic senator who bought the house. Oh geez, when did he buy the house? I don't even know. Oh, let's see, 1885. He and his wife Sarah bought the house, and he bought it to be one of many of their houses. Lucky guy. They had a few different estates, and this was their spring and fall vacation home. So they lived there only during those seasons, and they decided to do a major renovation not long after they bought the house, and they hired the very esteemed architectural firm of McKim, Mead and White. And they came in like 1909, 1910 and did a facelift. They added a few different porches and a new front terrace area. And I think they extended some of the rooms and made it a little bit more grand. And at that time, he called in his, also related, his cousin, Beatrix Farrand, I think second cousin, because he was first cousins with Edith Wharton. And another Newbold cousin had just had Farrand put in a garden in Pennsylvania. C.W. Newbold, I believe, had just had her put in a garden for him. And so she was very connected to these people and was asked, could you please come and put in a garden that we can enjoy in the spring and the fall? So here is a picture looking northwest of the back of the Bellefield House as it's under construction and still predating the walled garden that we know today. Newbold was friends with the Roosevelts, so it made sense that he bought this house so that they could hang out with each other, and they did. There's a lot of notes in the diaries of the housekeepers and the cooks of who was having lunch with who and who would be going to Springwood for lunch and who would be coming over to Bellefield to hang out. And this is a picture of Franklin, of FDR, on horseback, we think with his daughter Anna, and this is the driveway in front of Bellefield. So they spent a lot of time together, and Franklin was almost the exact same age as the Newbold's daughter Mary. So they socialized a lot. This was it made sense that they would buy the house right next door to be near their friends. And here's a really cute picture that Mary drew of the Bellefield Mansion in 1893. So their young daughter, who was FDR's contemporary. I think this is just a sweet little doodle of the house. And this is a picture that we got from the Morgan family. So Mary Newbold, the daughter that we mentioned, married someone named Morgan, Gerald Morgan, and their family used the house more than springs and falls, from what I understand, and they utilized it, and there's so many wonderful family pictures of things going on in the backyard, and this is in the Farrand Garden in the backyard. There's pictures of some with chickens and kids having snowball fights and all sorts of neat things that we've seen because the Morgan descendants have shared a lot of stuff with us. So this is just a sweet picture of a family member enjoying the back garden. And when the Morgans decided, when Mary passed away and the Morgans decided not to keep this house, I think it was Mary's wish that the house actually get donated at this point to the rest of the National Park estate. So here's an article laying out that the grounds were donated, I believe, in 1975 or 1976. And it was a major donation, not just because of the beautiful grounds in the garden, but because until this point, the offices for the National Park Administration were inside of Springwood and some other historic buildings. And if you can guess that a historic building is not going to remain in great shape with a lot of foot traffic coming in and out by administration and rangers. So Bellefield became the new regional headquarters for the National Park Service Administration. So that's what it's used for today. And it's a wonderful, wonderful asset to the site to have this building for all of the different offices, and people don't have to be treading up and down the stairs of Springwood anymore than they have to. And so with the donation also, there was land donated that became the Wallace Visitor Center, which is our beautiful, beautiful visitor center on site, and some other parking lots and the redirection of the entry driveway. And so a lot of wonderful improvements to the site were made because of the donation of the Bellefield estate. And when it was donated in '76, the Park Service probably took one look at this fancy backyard garden and thought, we don't have the resources to take care of this, and this is not our priority while we're trying to maintain the rest of this historic site. And FDR has only passed away a few decades ago, and we have so many visitors, and this is just not our priority. So the beautiful backyard garden that was made was completely put to bed, put to sleep. And the trellises that you can see, the shadows, those dark lines along the walls, the trellis system was taken down, and the beds were covered with black plastic. So you can see a little bit of like edge of like garbage plastic kind of around. All of the flower beds were just covered with black plastic and put to bed. And that was the state that the garden was found in the early 90s. The gates were totally derelict and falling apart, the wood was rotted away. But someone who was visiting the park site, a Hyde Park resident, walked around this walled garden and thought, this is an important looking place. Somebody who knew what they were doing designed this place, even though there was nothing growing in it and it was just kind of a barren field with falling apart hardware. They thought this is an important place. And their daughter at the time was going to school for landscape. I forget what her degree was at Cornell, landscape design or landscape architecture. And they did a little poking around and they discovered this is a Beatrix Farrand site. How fantastic. And so she actually wrote her dissertation. The student wrote her dissertation on this, and it became the project proposal to give to the National Park Service for the formation of a park partner group, so that a group of really dedicated volunteers got together and had a plan of how we were going to restore this garden. So they found plans. I mentioned the archives in California. They found plans for the garden. So this is laid out from west to east. I'm sorry, from north to south. If you're looking left to right, the Bellefield Mansion would be at the very left of your screen. And you see the dark lines are the walls that are still there, and it goes down to the right with the hedge, the hemlock hedge that would be there. And you see in the bottom corner in Beatrix's beautiful handwriting, for the Honorable Thomas Newbold of Hyde Park, New York. So this was her original design plan drawing. And here we are looking at it today. So you see that the paths are very in line with the porch, and the rooms of the garden are set up so that they're in exact symmetry with the walls and the porch and the windows of the house. Everything was laid out exactly because it was done, at the same time as the McKimmey and White architectural redo. So I think she was playing off of a lot of the things that they were putting in, a lot of the new elements that the designs were seeing in the house. And you see going off into the different garden rooms, we have the big first room that gets smaller. You see the pathways kind of cinch in and go out. It starts with double beds of flowers that go into single beds of flowers that then go into an even smaller room that's just hedged with no beds of flowers. And it offers you kind of a forced perspective that's an optical illusion that the garden is even bigger than it is. So if this is from my perspective, standing at the Bellfield House looking south, it draws you kind of out into this wilderness. It would have been much more wooded back in 1912 when it was built. There would have been a lot more trees further south that you would see out there. And going from the man-made walls to the hemlock hedge even more introduces this feeling of more natural wildness. And we talked about her inspiration from William Robinson and the Wild Garden, incorporating natural elements to draw you out into a more natural location. Was playing with the idea of garden rooms and what could be on the outside of it, so that you want to explore. You're not just concerned with the things inside, but you want to explore the larger space. And here's some of our wonderful volunteers working to maintain it. Just a closer up look of that last final garden room section. And we also found some beautiful pictures, some beautiful design drawings of the gates. She made really specific instructions on how the interlocking of the mitering of the woods and the beautiful things that should happen with the gate. And she designed our gorgeous filigree iron top ornaments on the top of our gates, which you can still see if you visit. Here's some more pictures of the hinges and the latches and all of the different elements that would happen with our gates that she designed. And the trellis system that she designed. And this was an element that she used in a few other garden designs that she put in. So she has these permanent vertical structures that are hardwood, and then these horizontal structures that are bamboo that get replaced every few years. They just kind of decay and we replace them. But the hard elements, and as plants change and grow, and you need to give them some flexibility of how you tie them to trellising. So having one element fixed and one that's more flexible is really, really ergonomic, really useful. And she also had a little drawing that she designed for a summer house, and the end of the garden would have a little gazebo, and this was never put in, but we do have the drawing for it. Maybe the Newbolds didn't like it, maybe they didn't want to spend the money on it, maybe they just weren't interested. For whatever reason, it was never realized, but we have a little drawing of it, which I think is really charming. And here we are in today, how the garden looks. And people ask us all the time, is this exactly the way she would have wanted it? And so the answer to that is I showed you pictures of the garden and the gates and the trellises and the wall system and all of those things. But what we don't have are her original plant lists. She has many original plant lists for other sites, many of them that are gone. But unfortunately for this site, maybe she wrote it down and gave it, to Sarah Newbold and Sarah lost it, or maybe there never was one, or maybe who knows, but there's no plant list. So this brilliant young scholar who wrote her dissertation on the garden discovered from all the archives that there was another garden pretty nearby from a very, very similar era that she designed that looks really similar, with the same kind of rooms and the same layout of double beds. And that was in Harrison, New York. So she took those plans, and they were from the same period and the same zone, the same planting zone, and thought, just like an artist, a painter or a sculptor, or anyone in fine arts uses similar mediums during a similar era of their art expression, she would probably use the same plants. She would probably be doing the same type of design during the same period of her life. So it's not a great leap to decide that we're going to use plants that were already in her, in her vocabulary of the same era, and we're just using them in ours. So they are Farrand plants. We can't speak to the 100% accuracy that these were the plants that were put in 1912, but we bet that it's the great majority of them are. And since it was designed to be a spring and fall garden, the things that we have planted specifically are at their peaks, mostly in spring and fall. And the 4 different color borders that we have set up, when you come to visit, you'll see that we have a pink border and a white border, a mauve purple border, and a blush cream gray border. So these are all colors that were in her more preferenced, as we talked about at Garland Farm, she loved cool colors. So we have a very cool color garden. You won't find any bright yellows and oranges in our garden. And we have some beautiful vines. She writes about lianas or vines in her Reef Point journal. And she has a lot of vertical gardens in her other locations at Dumbarton Oaks and some other places at Harkness Memorial in Connecticut. There's a lot of sites where she's designed these beautiful vertical elements. So we have all on the interior of the walls, we have a lot of vines. We have achibia and wisteria and some non-flowering trumpet vine. And our beautiful gates got restored. And there was a local Eagle Scout group that did this as a project many years ago and gave us some beautiful new oak doors exactly to her her specifications, because we have her beautiful drawings and all of her designs about the joinery and all the other elements of it. So they were refurbished for us, and the National Park Service makes sure that they're sealed and taken care of and beautiful. And yeah, so I just wanted to put another few pictures. Oh, I know I put this one in because of the elm tree. So the other thing that we had to replace, Dutch elm disease, we know, a lot of elm trees have not done well in our area. So there was an elm tree in the spot that we now have a Zelkova. So I just put a couple of pictures to show you the early vantage of the historic tree. So this tree did not make it, and we now have replaced it with a very disease resistant Zelkova. So this is looking at our garden. This is 2 years ago, I took this picture out of the servants' quarters at Bellfield from up on the 3rd floor. So you can see the new tree in the exact location that the elm was in, but it's not the original. And the peonies are going to be up really soon. And I think I put this in because I wanted to tell you guys about the spring blooms that are about to happen. So we could not have had this talk on a better time in the year, because we're at the end of April, and by the end of May, we're going to have a lot of stuff popping. So I know we're a little behind right now in our Hudson Valley for the bloom schedule normally, but in the spring, we have a huge peony collection. So usually by the last weekend of May, it's just a fireworks display with peonies, and we have lots and lots of different bearded irises, and these are ragged robins, and I see some columbines in this picture, and lupins. I see behind in the very back, all the valerian is coming up at that point. The creeping phlox, which is just getting going right now. I was there yesterday and there was already a lot of creeping phlox in bloom. And then when you come in the, like I said, spring and fall, if you come in the late summer, we get a whole nother flush of great stuff coming up. So I see a stilby behind these beautiful lilies, lots of lilies and phlox. We have a bunch of phlox in both the purple and the white beds. And we have a huge collection of Japanese windflowers, the anemone hupahensis. So this is the Honorine Jobert, which is a super romantic, beautiful white variety of that Japanese anemone. More phlox. This is the Boltonia. We have a big aster collection as well. And this is the plant that I thought, if we were in person and I was giving a tour, what would people definitely ask me? What is that? And this is the plant that everyone says, what is that? And some of you might know if you're garden lovers, but this is a plant whose common name is called bear's breeches. And it is apparently rumored to have inspired the designing of Corinthian columns, which, like, if you look at a Corinthian column, it has the same shape of these flowers. But this is something that a lot of people are like pretty excited to see in the garden. And here's another picture of it in the early spring I took last year when I was trimming the vines along the wall, just to give you kind of an idea of how it looks right now. This is early spring in the garden, and you can see the layout of the double beds and the pathways. And I'm just looking if I've missed anything in all of my notes of things I wanted to touch on. You know, usually I have a lot of questions popping up as I'm talking, and it's funny to be doing this for myself in a room, but let's see. Yeah.
So everyone, you could put on in the chat your questions and we can read them or answer them, or if you want to put your hand up, then you can unmute yourself.
I went a little long, so I don't know if people have energy, but I'm happy to answer any questions. The very last thing I just wanted to talk about, my very, very last point, was that we're going to be doing a really, really wonderful project starting this year, and it's probably going to last a couple of years. This is her original drawing I showed you a few slides back. That wiggly line that you see all the way around the outside of the garden, she indicated that she was going to put in a wild garden, and the wild garden never got realized, but we're going to do it. So we've started a couple of years ago doing all of the, the back plan permits and archaeological surveys and all the things that we needed to do. And we've put together a whole list of plants and project plans. And this is something that we're going to be breaking ground on this year. So the wild garden realization is going to be really neat because, like I said, people don't know our garden is there. And when they see an exterior intentional garden, as they're going to the Wallace Center, Visitor Center, or to Springwood, they're going to see this place that they're hopefully going to be very interested to come and look at. So I put some pictures of what the outside currently looks like. It's not the most inviting exterior. If you're walking by, you don't necessarily think to go inside and see this beautiful flower garden, but it's always open. Anytime that the grounds of the national park are open, our garden is also open. The gates aren't locked. You just open them and come right in, and all are welcome. Anytime, dogs are welcome. You can picnic on the lawn. You're welcome to bring, your children to play around. And I hope that you all, if you haven't visited, I hope you come this year. And you can look at our website and find out about different programs that we're offering and find out more about volunteering and anything else. There's a lot of information about the history. And
so there is one question. Do you have a link, Berkeley?
Oh, I don't have a link for Berkeley because I didn't think it would be made live, and it was a very, very long EDU type of link. But if you literally just Google Beatrix Farrand UC Berkeley, that's the first thing that comes up. It's a huge, I mean, it's a huge repository of information. So the link is full of stuff.
Any other questions? Thank you, Karen. I think this is a great presentation.
What
And
are the hours?
what are the hours?
Sure. Yeah, we're open anytime that the FDR National Park is open. So they do change their hours seasonally, depending, you know, they want to close before it's dark out. So depending on, like in the summer, we're open much later. I think right now it might be 7 to 7, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But anytime the national park is open, we are also open.
And is there parking near the garden?
Yeah, there's parking at Bellfield, so that's just about, you know, 150 feet away. And there's parking at the visitor center, which is also very, very close. Everything is within a 1 to 2 minute walk away, the parking.
Wonderful.
what is the
Wonderful
exact-
presentation.
Sorry, what is the exact address to the garden? You're getting
Sure,
asked that.
Yeah, it's, let's see, I can go back to that. Maybe, I don't know if I can do that actually on here. I was gonna, it's 4097 Albany Post Road. So it's right off of Route 9, Albany, you know, Albany Road, Route 9, across the street from that drive-in movie theater. The Hyde Park movie theater is right across the street from us. And the Farm Lane trail system is right across the street, but it's the big main FDR National Park historic site.
Well, thank you for this great presentation. I'm going to definitely go for a visit. I love gardening and I didn't even realize you existed. You're right.
It's true.
So
we get visitors who literally live across the street and say, I've lived here my entire life and I didn't know this was here. So, you know, I'm trying real hard to make sure everybody knows, and that and I want it to be used. I want people to come and have, can you imagine bringing someone for a date in this garden? Like a romantic picnic, or having your children come and do an art class, or, there's so many ways that this garden could be used. And I want to make sure everyone knows it's theirs. It's a public place. There's no fee for admission. You're welcome anytime. It's a public federal land place. So it's yours to use and enjoy.
Karen, thank you so much. This is Nancy.
Oh,
And
hi, Nancy.
This was beyond. I mean, I know I've been to the garden, but this is just a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And your enthusiasm is infectious, and I can't wait to come up.
Oh, good. Thank you. I look forward to meeting you in person and having you in the garden.
So the nice thing about this is Mayfest is coming May 21st and 22nd. Then right after the peonies, your garden's like blooming.
Yes.
So everybody come to Mayfest, and then the week after we go to the garden. So it works out really well.
Yeah, there's so much to do in our area in the spring. It's just wonderful.
So you should take a look at the chat, because everybody's saying thank you. What a beautiful presentation and everything. There's so many comments for you there going well.
Oh, thank you.
So a gift from you to you from the Walkway is that we gift each speaker with a full year membership for the Walkway.
Wow. Oh, thank you.
So we'll be emailing that this week to you, and we would love to get together with you, talk about some possibilities. It's always good to teamwork up and do some beautiful things. So
yeah, I mentioned to you, I love the Walkway. I ride the rail trail to the Walkway all the time. I love it. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
So anybody else with any other questions? Well, then I wish you guys a great spring evening. And on April 30th, don't forget, we have at Upper Landing Park, we will teach you about the glass eels and everything. Karen, this has been recorded, so this will be up online on social for good now with us.
Great.
So, and then it gets shared a lot from there. So I think that'll help you get the word out a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's wonderful.
Okay, well, everybody have a good evening.
Good night. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.